We finished with World War I in the last module. Now we're going to look at the time between the wars and some of the things that were going on around the world. Predominantly here, we're going to talk about how fascism leads to the rise of Hitler, and also how the Great Depression and the economic situation that began really, throughout the world, but in the United States really kicked it into what was known as a worldwide depression, how that kind of affected everybody and how that actually came to be. So we're going to kind of mix a little bit of U.S. history, a little bit of Western Civ into this module. So by the time we get to World War II, which should be our last module, we're going to try and get all the way to World War II. This module only has like 3 sections in it, so we're going to be able to kind of get that done and move forward through that. But we're going to talk about how all of these things really caused World War II, kind of how World War I also had a lot of different things that built up into it. World War II also had quite a bit of things that, combined to create a situation where a world war could take place, a mere 30 years after what was considered to be the war that would end all wars, which was World War I. So clearly it was not the war that ended all wars, because we have a war literally 30 years later that is very similar to it. But this is kind of how that ends up happening. The first thing you have to understand was the Treaty of Versailles. And we talked about this at the end of World War I, how the Treaty of Versailles was really set up by those who participated in writing it to punish Germany. And do y'all remember who was the #1 person really pushing to punish Germany for World War I? Yeah, France. France really, really was angry with Germany. They had already had the Franco-Prussian War in the mid-1800s or the late 1800s. Germany had taken land from France. France wanted it back. They blamed Germany for all these terrible things that had happened, and they want to punish them. And so a great deal of the Treaty of Versailles, as we discussed, was punishing Germany and taking land away from them. If you look at this map here, you can see this area in kind of red, and if you watch it on the YouTube, this is kind of the pink area here. This was Germany prior to the end of World War I. Okay, Prussia and Germany had basically taken all this land, and the Ottoman Empire was kind of an ally with them at least. And at the end of World War I, this is kind of what Europe looks like. And all these different colors become different countries. They take tons of territory away from Germany, make them pay war reparations, make them take all the blame. And this really upsets the people of Germany. They destroy their entire government style, make them have a republic instead of a monarchy, which the monarchy was something that the Germans truly appreciated and revered. And then you have Italy down here, who at the beginning of the war was, allied with Germany and Austria. But by the end of the war, had broken away from them and joined the other side, hoping that when the war was over, that they would be able to get some extra territory up here in Austria. Unfortunately, they are denied that territory by Great Britain and France, because they kind of saw them as, Johnny-come-latelys to helping us out, right? And also Britain and France wanted to have the upper hand on what's going on in Europe. So all of these things are going to kind of build into this. Now, this is particularly devastating to Italy. And in Italy, we start to see a change. We start to see what's called the rise of fascism. Now, what you have to understand about fascism is that fascism, and it gets thrown around today. We have, even in America, we have this crazy group, this terrorist organization called Antifa, right? Which is like anti-fascism. Like, that's their whole thing. But if you look at them and they go, oh, we're anti-fascists, so we're against, the government and all this stuff, right? But the tactics that they use are pretty much the exact same tactics that were used during the rise of fascism in Italy, which is kind of ironic. So you have, it's this totalitarian form of government where basically the government controls every aspect of the people's lives. It glorifies the state. It tells, everybody in the country that the government is the number one priority, that it's the number one thing, that the government has your best interest at heart, that it's doing all the good things for you. But in fascism, you basically only have one leader and one party. So you might have elections at the local level, but they're all part of the same party. So imagine there being no Republican and Democrat, just one party in America. And so if you're going to go vote, guess what? You're voting for one party. You're not really getting a choice. Again, all aspects of society are controlled by the government. They own all businesses. They own how much money you make. They own how long you work. They own what job you work in. They control the education. They control the military. Every part of life is controlled by the government. There's no opposition. If you protest, you're either killed or put in jail. So not only do they want you to say and do what they tell you to, but if you say and do anything other than that, we kill you, basically. And so, and propaganda and censorship are widely practiced, where basically the government is putting out pro-government information exclusively. All the news that you see is run through the filter of the government, so you only get the news that they want you to get. And the guy who kind of invented this idea really, and took it to the extreme and really put it into practice in this way, was a guy named Benito Mussolini. Mussolini comes to power in 1922. He was at the end of World War I, you have this depression that's going to take place in Italy. You have the disarmament, so they disband quite a bit of the military. Unfortunately, you have all of these military veterans that had fought in the war and now have nothing else to do. They're all basically just sitting around going, well, we don't know what to do. There's no jobs. What do we do? Well, Mussolini says, well, we can make our government really great, but I'm going to need some help. So he kind of comes up with this idea where he is going to hire these army veterans to kind of sow political discord. All right? They call them the brown shirts or the black shirts. And so he uses them to kind of start attacking and killing and terrorizing his political opponents. And nobody knows that it's him kind of pulling the strings. So it gets bad enough that he's like, hey, this is terrible in our country. All these people are being, terrorized. I need to be able to help you. So he goes into the people and says, I can stop this terrorism. All the while, he's the one causing the terrorism. So he started a fire, and then he's like, I'm a firefighter. I can put the fire out, even though he started it. Well, eventually he starts moving up through the government, and he gets to the point where the whole country is about to erupt into violence, and he says, hey, if y'all will make me president, I can guarantee you, if you give me all control over the military completely, if you give me complete control over the economy and the government, I'll bring this terrorism to an end in a heartbeat. And they were like, okay, finally. I mean, this is very, very, very watered down how this worked. But essentially, he says, hey, put me in charge and I'll make it end. And at this point, the black shirts are like marching on Rome. Like they're about to kill everybody. And they're like, fine, Benito, you take over. And he's like, all right. And they go, so what are we going to do? How are we going to stop him? And he goes, we're going to stop him like this. Hey, guys, we won. Y'all can stop. But now he's in control of the entire government, and he's dictator. And now he controls everything. And they were like, oh, you were in control of them? And he was like, yeah, I was. And they're like, well, then give us our government back. He's like, sorry, and kills all of them. And then he's in control. So that happens. And then there's this guy up in Germany going like, hey, that was pretty awesome how you did that. I should do that. We're upset up here too. I know what I'll do. I'll basically do the same thing. And his name was Adolf Hitler. He essentially adopted fascism in the way of Benito Mussolini. He was like, that's a great idea. Now, believe it or not, Hitler's a little bit different in that Hitler was actually elected. He was elected Chancellor of Germany. And it took several years. He began in 1929, and you can't see it here because it's white on white, but essentially in 1924 is the first time that he tries to get his new socialist party known as the Nazi Party into the elections. And in 1924, things aren't that bad. People are back to work after the war. Things are going okay. And so people are like, dude, nobody needs you. We're not voting for you. He only got like 1.8 million votes, which was like nothing. Like, it was like 0.5%. And then he's like, well, Benito Mussolini just took over the government. He tries to do this in what became known as the beer hall putsch, where basically he gets a bunch of people together. He tries to capture the leaders of the government and then have them put him in control. That gets thwarted, and then he gets thrown in jail for a while. It's in jail where he kind of develops and writes his own memoir, and he writes the book Mein Kampf, and this kind of becomes the basis for Nazism and his ideas of what he's going to do with the government. But when he gets out of prison, by 1930, the Great Depression is starting to kick off, right? It's starting to affect him, and unemployment starts going up. And you can see here, by that point, 1930, the unemployment rate is at like 1.1%, all right? No, it's 1.1 million people are unemployed. Now things are getting worse. Somebody who is extreme saying, I'm going to take and make the government better, looks a lot better, and he gets 6.4 million votes. By 1932, Germany is in dire positions. He looks even more popular. You've got 5.3 million Germans unemployed. He gets 11.7% of the vote. Uh-oh. That's like 37% of the country votes for him. By 1933, or 1932, November, they hold another election because, you know, the government's so inept that the people just keep going, kick him out, vote again. And then he gets like 40% of the vote, okay? And so by 1933, he doesn't win that one, and then he convinces them, vote again, and they overthrow the government and kick them all out and vote again. And this time he gets 17.28% of the vote, the Nazis do, which accounted for 43.9, which means he had the most votes of any party. And in a system like that, whichever party has the most representatives gets to pick the leader. So, of course, they pick Hitler because everybody is in such bad shape that they'll do anything. Most European economies were really unstable. And then in the United States, when you have the stock market crash, it's going to lead to the Great Depression spreading throughout the entire world. Desperate people are obviously going to seek help from powerful leaders who promise wealth and military might and glory for your country, and that's what happens. Now, what causes the Great Depression? So there's 5 main causes. These are all very important to understand and know. The first one is that you have an agricultural depression. So here's why you have an agricultural depression in the United States. In the 1910s, being a farmer was very profitable, okay? If you were a farmer, you could make a really good living selling crops. And no matter how many crops you sold, you could then sell, or how many you grew, you sold all of them. And the main reason for this is because in Europe, they're in the middle of World War I. And there's no crops being grown in Europe, really. And so America is basically supplying food to the entirety of Europe, all right? So if you're a farmer in America, you grow too much food for Americans to eat, it doesn't matter. You can sell it overseas and make a huge profit. Well, once World War I ends and Europe begins to grow their own food again, these farmers don't slow down. In fact, it causes the prices to go down, but instead of farmers going, hey, maybe I should plant less, in order to keep up making the same amount of money, they start to plant even more, which creates even more overproduction, which in turn makes prices fall even more. And then they grow more food, and then that makes prices go down even more. And you go, well, what's the big deal with that? The problem is that all of these farmers, when they could sell it for a huge profit, had taken out a bunch of bank loans to buy more land and more tractors and more machines, and so they could farm more and more and more and make more money. Well, now when the prices are going down, they're not going to be able to make the payments on those loans, which means they're going to default, and then the bank's going to come and take all their land. They're going to basically end up super broke. Okay? You also have the problem that the bank has now loaned out a bunch of money that's never going to be paid back, and that's going to contribute to this. So that kind of is overproduction. But we also see overproduction in the industrial sector. You have a lot of new inventions, appliances, washing machines, all these things, stoves, refrigerators, radios, all these things are being produced, and Americans are buying them up, buying them up, buying them up, buying them up. But guess what? You only need one washing machine. You only need one stove. You only need, at most, 3 or 4 radios. Most families had one, right? But if you were super rich, you might have a radio in every room, right? But there comes a point that you buy enough stuff that you don't need anymore, right? But these companies are going, wow, I sold 100,000 last year, or 2 years ago, 150,000 last year. I'm probably going to sell 200,000 this year. So they take out a loan from the bank going, hey, I need enough money from the bank to be able to produce 200,000 of these. But eventually you produce 200,000 and then you only sell 50,000 because everybody's already bought one. Has anybody ever noticed that stuff today seems to be made to break? You ever heard your grandparents talk about the fact that stuff back in the day used to last a lot longer? And does anybody have one of those really old school like washer dryers that your parents or your grandparents just won't let go? Like they'll just keep getting them fixed because they just don't make them like that anymore. Everything's energy efficient, which my grandmother always said, energy efficient means not worth a crap, right? Like, or how about toilets like today? Like the economic flush, like you can barely flush the toilet and get everything out the bowl because it's so weak, right? Back in the day, they just used to be like, who cares? 10 gallons of water in one flush, right? You could flush concrete with those old school toilets. Today, you can barely flush Lucky Charms. I mean, it's nothing, right? So everything back in the day used to last a lot longer. You only bought one, and then it lasted for 40 years, so you didn't need to buy another. Well, all these companies are making all these appliances, borrowing money, going into debt in order to produce enough because they think they're going to sell a bunch, and then all of a sudden, boom, they stop selling them. And all those people that took out loans, those companies, can't pay those loans back. And what looked like a company that was worth a couple $1 million because of what they said they were going to sell, now they've got a bunch of stuff sitting in warehouses that ain't ever going to sell. And their companies go, so you go, well, why would a bank give a company a loan? Well, actually, some of the loans that they got were not really loans. They came from the stock market, okay? What they did was people bought stocks in companies based on what they thought the company was worth because of what the company said that they were selling, okay? Those people were the ones getting loans to buy stock, which is stupid. Basically getting a loan from a bank at 20% interest, putting it in the stock market and going, I think it's going to go up enough that it'll cover me. Well, what if it doesn't? Then it goes, which sucks. All right. Increased production, and all this people buying into stock and all this stuff, hey, that's great. It makes the people that own the companies rich, but they're not paying workers more. They're not doing anything to actually bring all the rest of Americans up. So when economic hard times do come, all the workers are still super poor, and all the company owners are still super rich, okay? Real estate speculation is the same way. People are buying land in Florida and California with bank loans saying this land's going to go up in value. And they're getting these huge loans. And then when the land doesn't go up in value, they can't afford to pay the loans back. So then every one of these things, what do they have in common? Where's the money coming from? The banks. And what happens if a bank doesn't get their money back? They don't have any. What's the purpose of a bank? That's a real question, not rhetorical. What's the purpose of a bank? Huh? No, not to store money. I know. I'm teaching you something here. What's the purpose of a bank? Have you ever thought about it? Why do banks exist? Anybody? To give out loans? Well, kind of actually. Why do banks give out loans? To make money. Guys, banks are businesses. You don't open a bank because you're a good Samaritan. You open a bank because there's a lot of money in it. How does a bank make money? By giving out loans. They take your money and they give it to other people. So if you take $100,000 and put it in the bank, that bank is not going to sit there with your money behind the counter. In fact, if you go in and you have anything over like $5,000 in the bank and you say, hey, I want to close my bank account, they're like, hey, that's fine, but you're going to have to come back in a couple days because we don't have that kind of money sitting around. They have to get that money so that they can give it to you. Because what they do is they take your money and then they give it to other people in terms of loans. And in return for you giving them your money, they give you a little bit of a percentage like interest rate, like 1% or whatever. They say, hey, we're going to use your money, we'll give you 1% interest. And then they take your money and loan it out to people and charge them 10% interest. And then they keep the difference. The problem is if they take all the money that has been given to them and they loan it out, and then the people that they loaned it out to can't pay it back, and in fact can never pay it back, where's your money? Gone. And that's exactly what happens with the Great Depression, is that it's not that the stock market fell. It's that the people who had invested in the stock market and bought a stock in a company at $50 a share, thinking next year it's going to be worth $75 a share. And they'd got a bank loan with your money to buy those stocks. And then instead of going to 75, it goes to 5. That person just lost all your money. And this happened at alarming numbers, okay? Companies had expanded to this point. They'd slowed down hiring. Corporate profit goes up. Workers' wages do not. The richest 1% own about 1/3 of all American assets. And with the wealth concentrated in the hands of very few, that limits how much economic growth can happen. But ultimately, there was basically no regulations on banks. Like today, the federal government oversees banks and says, hey, this is how much money you're allowed to give out in loans. If you give out too much, then we're going to stop you from doing that because you're not going to have enough money to pay back the people that put their money in your bank. There was nothing like that before, okay? And again, buying on margin, that's what I was talking about, where people would get a loan to buy stocks, basically speculating that it's going to go up in value, hoping that it does. It's very, very stupid. Okay? So all of these loans have been taken by all these people. The banks were just giving them out willy-nilly. And then all of a sudden, boom, it stops. You know, the stock price is far above what a company's actually worth. And then when they figure that out, the stock price is going to go way back down to what it's actually should have been worth to begin with. And that's when everybody's going to lose their tails. I mean, they're going to lose everything. All right. Black Thursday, stock prices start to plunge when people get these third quarter reports that show like, hey, these companies are losing a lot of money. They're not really worth very much. And people are like, oh crap, I got to sell my stock while it's still valuable. So people start trying to sell stock. And everybody's like, dude, we saw the same thing you did. I'm not buying that stock. So if you can't sell it at $50 and you want to get rid of it, you'll go, hey, I'll take $45 for it. And people go, I don't want to buy it at $45. I'll sell it to you for $40. And they go, that company sucks. I'm not buying it at $40 either. Like, but I bought it at $50. I thought it was going to go to 75. I bought it at 50. Please just give me some of my money back. You know, we're not going to buy it at 40. How about 35? Nope. 30? Nope. 25? No. Come on, you're killing me. 20? No. 15? No. 10? No. Is there any price you'll buy this from me? No. So what was worth $50 is now worth basically nothing. And all that money that you spent to invest in it, you just lost. And now you can't pay your bank loan back. And then when people realize that people can't pay those bank loans back, they're like, oh, the banks are in trouble. And they go to the bank and they go, hey, I want my money. Give me my money out of the bank. Give me what you got. Well, that doesn't take very long before the bank looks up and goes, we don't have any money. We're out of money. And if you didn't get your money out and the bank goes, we're out of money, what's the bank going to do? Hey, guys, we're out of business. Sorry, we're bankrupt. Bank is closed forever. You go, but I didn't get my money out. And they go, well, there's no money to get out. Sorry. No more bank. No more money. Yeah. Thousands of banks closed. Thousands of banks closed. And every single deposit in those banks, if you didn't get it out, was gone. Millions of Americans lost their entire life savings. Just like that, gone. Yeah, it was terrible. The Dow Jones Industrial Average on September of 1929 was 381. By July of 1932 was at $41. The average stock price was 381 or whatever it was, and then by then it was 41. That's a lot. In fact, we don't get back up to 381 until 1954. That's how overinflated that it was. It wasn't that, it was that these companies were being valued far more than they actually were producing. But it was just, it looked like it was never going to end. The economic prosperity was going to go forever, and then it didn't, and everybody lost everything. People had runs on banks. Again, you'd go stand in line for hours and hours and hours trying to get your money out, and when they ran out of money, they said, bank closed forever. And if you were standing out here and you hadn't got your money, you're now penniless. You have nothing. This is going to spread to the entire world because basically during the 1920s, the United States was propping up the world. We had such a good economy. We were helping everybody else rebuild their economies. And when our banks failed and our economy went to the toilet, so did the rest of the world. In 1930, 26,000 businesses failed. They laid off millions of workers, and nobody's buying radios and washing machines and stoves and refrigerators anymore, right? Unemployment's at 3.2% in 1929. By 1933, it was about 25% unemployment. U.S. Steel, y'all remember Andrew Carnegie? He ends up selling his company to J.P. Morgan for like $300 billion. In 1929, had 250,000 full-time workers. In 1933, they shut the doors of the company. 0 workers in 4 years. The biggest, most strong company in the world closed. Some cities, the unemployment got up to 50, 60, 70, 80%. It's bad. Okay, the Great Depression was really bad. And again, this was mostly because of all the conditions that led to banks failing. All right? And that is how the Great Depression began.